Not too long ago, I went on a hike in the thick woods near my small town. It's a close community with less than 1,000 folks, far away from any big cities. These woods were pretty flat, no mountains or anything, but they had a few ponds and small rivers running through them. I was heading for one of those rivers that day. I'd been there a couple times before, but never camped overnight. I remembered it was about a 3-hour walk north. The woods were really quiet, just the sounds of birds and critters rustling around. There weren't any other people out there, and I wasn't expecting to see anyone since this wasn't even a real trail. But about 45 minutes from the river, I ran into someone. We were walking towards each other and seemed surprised to see anyone else out there. I definitely felt a bit confused and nervous, because meeting someone off trail like this was pretty weird. The guy seemed to feel the same way. I was about to say hi, but he just gave a nervous smile and turned to walk away. I did the same, but when I looked back, he was practically running off without saying anything. It was all pretty strange. It was like he didn't want to be seen, or didn't care that we'd crossed paths by chance. Anyway, I kept going and made it to the river. It wasn't a campsite or anything, so I just found a flat spot for my tent and started a fire since it was getting dark. I wanted to stay up and watch the stars, hoping to get a good view of the Milky Way. Hours went by, and then I heard something in the woods behind me, footsteps, slow and quiet. I looked around, but it was too dark to see anything. The footsteps stopped, so whoever it was could see me, even if I couldn't see them. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it around, but I didn't see anyone. My heart started racing, and that unsettled feeling came back. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there wasn't a sound. After thinking for a minute, I walked towards where I'd heard the noise, just to be sure. I moved my flashlight around, checking behind each tree. Then, the light landed on a big guy, the same one I'd run into earlier. He was standing still, maybe 20 feet away. I tried to act calm and kept moving my flashlight, hoping he thought I hadn't seen him. I walked back to my tent, trying to look relaxed. But then, I grabbed my bag and quickly left, following the riverbank into the woods. Once I felt I was far enough away, I ran as fast as I could, until I was sure the guy wasn't following me. I found a place to rest and stayed there until morning. I don't think he followed me, and I never saw him again. I have no idea why he was out there or why he hid near my camp, but I never went back to get my tent. I was too scared of what I might find. I took my RV to a secluded spot in the woods near my house. I live in the countryside, and camping's pretty normal around here. The spot I picked wasn't well known, just big enough for a few RVs. I liked it because it was usually empty and easy to get to. When I arrived, the field was empty. I chilled in the RV for a bit, then set up the outside tent area and my chair. I started gathering wood for a fire, even though it was still early, just to be ready. I went into the woods behind the RV, far enough that I couldn't see the campsite anymore. A lot of the wood was damp from a recent rain, so it took a while to find dry pieces. When I got back, maybe 20 minutes later, there was a guy setting up a tent nearby. We nodded at each other, just acknowledging each other's presence. He didn't seem strange, but I was a little bummed I wouldn't have the place to myself. I dropped the wood and went back into the RV for a beer and some peace. I'm not sure how long I was in there, maybe 30 minutes, before I looked out the window. The guy had finished his tent, but it was in terrible shape. It was full of holes and tiers, with flaps hanging off. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, barely better than sleeping outside. And I couldn't see the guy inside. I looked around the campsite, but he was gone. I went outside and started my fire, wondering about the guy and his beat-up tent. As the sun set and it got dark, I sat by the fire, still unsure where he'd gone. I sat there for a while, the darkness getting thicker, with just the firelight around me. The night dragged on, and I kept thinking about the guy and why he hadn't come back. I checked my watch. It was almost 1 a.m., meaning it had been dark for almost 4 hours. I got up and went closer to his tent, just to make sure he wasn't there. I called out, but there was no answer. I stood there, looking at the dark woods around me, wondering if he was lost. But as I looked, I felt a chill, and then something moved near one of the trees. I stared at the spot, unsure what I'd seen. Then, My eyes made out the shape of a man standing by the tree. He was perfectly still, like he didn't want to be seen. Fear washed over me, and the longer I looked, the less sure I was that this was the same guy from the tent. I took a few steps back, then rushed into my RV. I looked out the window, and the man was still there, staring at me. After a moment, I started the RV and drove away. The scariest thing is that maybe that wasn't the guy from the tent. Maybe it was someone else, and maybe something had happened to the other guy. Or maybe they were together, and the first guy was watching me from somewhere else in the woods without me even knowing. 2 years ago, when I was living with my younger brother on the East Coast, we didn't really get out much. We hung out with friends and got food, but nothing really exciting. I started looking for things to do, and camping was a popular suggestion since we lived near the Appalachian Mountains. My brother wasn't interested, but I went ahead and bought a small tent and some supplies, packed a backpack, and drove to a nearby trail. Yeah, I was pretty inexperienced and shouldn't have gone alone, but I only planned to stay one night. After an hour's drive, I reached the trailhead. It was empty, and the trail itself was narrow and not well maintained. I guess it wasn't a popular one. As I hiked, it became obvious that hardly anyone used this trail. Bushes were overgrown, and in some parts the grass made it hard to tell where the trail was. But after an hour, I reached the campsite. It was just as overgrown as the trail, but something caught my eye: a pile of logs on the other side. Up close, I saw charred wood flakes, meaning it had been used recently, maybe even the night before. I looked around, but there were no tents or signs of anyone. Feeling a bit unsure, I went to the other side and set up my tent. It wasn't late, so I took my time. With about an hour of daylight left, I ate and relaxed in the tent. As the sun was setting, I heard a crackling noise, like a campfire. I looked out and saw a man sitting across the campsite by the burnt logs. He was older, maybe in his 40s. He was already looking at me, so I awkwardly waved. He waited a few seconds, then raised his hand too. I got some sticks and made a small fire. It got dark quickly, and now there were 2 campfires, mine and his. I kept glancing over, trying to see if he had a tent or anything, but all I could see was him. It was getting weirder and more uncomfortable. Where had he even come from? I would have heard him coming unless he'd approached from the other side, which was just thick woods. I sat there for at least an hour, maybe 2, and he didn't move. He just stared into the fire. Eventually, I went into my tent, figuring I was overthinking things, and he was probably just another camper. I tried to sleep, but my mind was racing, so I just listened to the crackling of his fire. Maybe another hour passed, and then I heard leaves crunching, coming closer to my tent. I sat up and saw the man's shadow outside. I froze, watching him stand there for a moment. Then, his shadow moved away, and I heard the leaves crunching again as he walked off. I unzipped the tent and looked out. The campsite was empty. He was gone, leaving only the burning logs. I quickly packed up, even breaking some of the tent poles in my rush. I left without seeing him again. I still don't know what happened there or what was going to happen.